Chinese President Xi Jinping has arrived in North Korea for a two-day visit. The Chinese leader said he's looking to bolster economic and diplomatic ties with Pyongyang as the neighbours seek to upgrade relations. This is Mr. Xi's first visit to North Korea in almost 7 years. He last met leader Kim Jong Un at a victory parade in Beijing last year. Let's speak to John Delury. He's Senior Fellow Non-Resident at Asia Society and Visiting Research Fellow at Ewha Womans University, Seoul. Well, John, President Xi's trip to North Korea is his first in years. And is this mainly a show of friendship, or is this, Beijing trying to pull Kim Jong Un back from getting too close to Russia?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. If we imagine even without the alliance that's really blossomed between Russia and North Korea, it's imaginable that Xi Jinping would make this visit. It's very important for China that they maintain what they describe as a strategic coordination with Pyongyang. This is a next door neighbor that is obviously in a hostile relationship with the Republic of Korea, here South Korea, a U.S. ally. You've got Japan lurking right off the edge. So it's a very critical region for Beijing to pay attention to Northeast Asia, and you've got now a nuclear-armed North Korea at the middle of that. So the Russia piece of it's important, and we can circle back to that. But I would say even without that, you may still see this trip.
Well, Kim Jong Un now has a stronger hand than before. Deeper ties with Moscow, a growing weapons program, and even fewer incentives to listen to Washington. Does President Xi still have real leverage over him?
I think vis-a-vis negotiations with the United States with Donald Trump, which was sort of the key focal point when there was the last round of summitry between Xi Jinping and Kim Jong Un back, as you mentioned, in 2019, the prospects of that are incredibly small. I mean, I would say there's almost no prospect for a substantive negotiation between Kim Jong Un and Donald Trump. There could be a meeting at some point, but not really negotiation. So if we look at China's piece of that, it's almost not a question of what kind of leverage Xi Jinping might have to restart those negotiations. They're simply not going to happen. I think that while it will come up and Xi Jinping might try to test the waters a little bit to understand, whether there is any appetite on Kim Jong Un's part for, again, at least a meeting with Donald Trump at some point, I'm not convinced that will be the focal point for the visit. I think that instead, what China is looking for, what Xi Jinping is looking for, is to ensure there's stability in this relationship, maybe look into the economic side if there's going to be room to increase economic ties between the two, and also, again, coordinate in terms of Northeast Asia as a region.
And China has long wanted stability on the Korean peninsula, but North Korea's military cooperation with Russia has really changed the equation. Is Beijing now really managing an ally or managing a problem?
That's a great question. The debate in Beijing used to be, among experts, there was a debate for a while, is North Korea an asset or a liability? So your question is a variation on that. It's really an age-old question for strategic thinkers in China, but the reality that they all know is you can't move North Korea. It is there. It's in a strategic area, an attack corridor on their own capital. And so they really have to manage it. Now they have to manage the uncertainty of how far the relationship, the military relationship with Russia goes. I think already there's a lot of uneasiness in China about how far it's progressed. I think that a goal of this trip and the wake of this trip would be, in a way, to set a kind of cap on how much further North Korea goes in its military connection with Russia. But as you say, Kim Jong Un has a lot of leverage. He has a lot of nuclear weapons. He has a lot of missiles. He's been showing those off recently. And so this is by no means an easy mission for Xi Jinping to just sort of walk in and tell Kim Jong Un what to do. Indeed, he wouldn't be making the visit to Pyongyang, to North Korea, unless to some extent, Kim were holding some of the cards.
And what does Kim really want from Xi this time around? Economic support, diplomatic cover, technology, or perhaps even simply recognition that North Korea cannot be isolated anymore?
Yeah, I think if you look at the pattern in the last year or so of Kim Jong Un's approach, I've called it a sort of charm offensive. I mean, there have been actually quite a string by North Korean standards of important visits, including, of course, by the Singaporean foreign minister, by the Vietnamese leader, and Kim Jong Un made that visit to Beijing last year. The president of Belarus. So again, by North Korean standards, which has tended over the years to by its own volition or by circumstance to look or feel isolated, Kim Jong Un right now is in a much more engaged mode. And so obviously hosting one of the most powerful world leaders out there, getting the first visit, the first foreign visit of Xi Jinping this year is to North Korea. This is a kind of coup for Kim Jong Un. He can play this up in his domestic media and show his country how he is keeping North Korea on the map. So there's a flex there that's available for Kim Jong Un. And then he is building a relationship with Xi Jinping that down the road will potentially be of strategic importance for him as well. So he has plenty to gain from this, and he gets to host. He gets to hold home court. So it's a good moment. It's a good opportunity for Kim Jong Un, both domestically and then in terms of North Korean foreign policy.
Right. And, China often says it wants peace, it wants stability. But if Beijing is seen standing closer to a nuclear-armed North Korea, does that then weaken its claim to be a responsible regional power?
Well, that's debatable, and some will certainly see it that way. On the other hand, North Korea has acquired this nuclear deterrent against the United States, and ultimately it's been the inability of not just Donald Trump, but successive American presidents to figure out how to get to the root of that issue and try, and a long time ago it was to head off the nuclear weapons program development. Now it would be at least to cap it. And that's the Chinese argument, but it's a fair argument, which is that, look, why does North Korea have nuclear weapons? Ultimately, it is as a deterrent against the United States. And so in that regard, China can certainly posture itself as a stabilizing force, again, vis-a-vis Vladimir Putin and Russia, which is actively engaged in military aggression and using North Korean support for its war against Ukraine. China looks much more moderate in its approach than that. And so while there will be some downsides to the kind of press, the global publicity of associating China with North Korea, at the end of the day, I think this does probably reinforce the Chinese narrative that it does want stability in its own backyard, certainly in the region.
Right. And, my last question to you is really, if President Xi really wants to influence, wants influence over Kim Jong Un, what is the red line for Beijing that we're talking here? At what point should North Korea's behavior become too destabilizing, even for China?
That's a great question. And years back, the Chinese foreign minister tried to answer that by saying, no war, no chaos. That's where you get to the red lines. When North Korea acts in an aggressive military way vis-a-vis South Korea, vis-a-vis the United States, that's where China, I think we actually would see China step in. And even if you go back to 2017 and you look at the sanctions that China and, for that matter, Russia approved at the United Nations Security Council, those were quite harsh sanctions that were imposed on North Korea. And that's because you could see the DPRK was approaching the Chinese red line in terms of the very aggressive pattern of missile testing, ICBM testing. And at that point, there was fear that North Korea would use a ICBM test with an actual nuclear device at full distance. So that's when you start to get toward the Chinese red lines. And that's something that Xi Jinping might not say in his meetings with Kim Jong Un, but it would be implicit, and there would be other ways for the Chinese to communicate to the North Koreans where things start to become unacceptable.
Thank you so much, for speaking to us and sharing your insights. John Delury, Senior Fellow at Asia Society there.